And it's a great pleasure to be here, and it's great to be here yesterday and see some of the research of this community. I have to say that when I was doing my PhD at Wharton, in addition to working in the management department, I spent some time in the ISSC group, Information Systems Strategy and Economics of the Open department there. And I started hedging my bets in the first few months with the double appointment work at LPS and at the ISSC group at Wharton as junior faculty with Eric Clements and David Crossan and Lauren Hitt, so perhaps a bit closer to some of the information issues that you guys are looking at. And it's a pleasure to sort of turn to some of these issues as well. What I'd like to share today is thoughts about theory of ecosystems. And the reason that I care about it, as Andrea prefaced it, is twofold. First, I've been interested for quite some time in trying to understand how industries evolve, and also to move between the conception that we understand what an industry is, to ask what an industry is, and to think more carefully about the rules, roles, and relationships that define them, which underlie industry architectures. One particular set of rules, roles, and relationships that exist is with the emergence of ecosystems, of groups of players that are interdependent and linked in particular ways that have now started getting particular attention. So, I've been looking at ecosystems and I've been trying to make some sense of this literature, as well as some sense of the phenomenon. There's been a heck of a lot of excitement about them. The biggest IPO in the world to date is Alibaba. Alibaba, in its prospectus, had the mention of the word ecosystem no less than 160 times, more than even business models or platforms, which I find quite interesting, because they seem to think that there's something interesting there. And if you go to any of the major consultants, you're going to see stuff on ecosystems, and maybe working with McKinsey that now says, oh my God, we need to create a working group on ecosystems. Accenture is doing the same thing, Deloitte is doing the same thing, PwC is doing the same thing. Everyone's terribly excited about that, and frankly, they're not entirely sure what it is. It's not very often that McKinsey says, yes, we'll be happy to sort of bring you in and perhaps pay you to help us think about something. The question is, what the heck does it come down to? And how is it different from other stuff? One of the issues, certainly if you go to the practice side, is that you see that the definitions have a bit of a sort of warm and friendly feel to them, which is something that unfortunately we tend to do in the literature as well. So the systems are dynamic and co-evolving communities of diverse actors that create and capture value. They go beyond the traditional industry silos, and they are richly networked. They create opportunities for innovation alongside the challenges that we see. And my concern there, as it is in a number of other recent additions to our vocabulary, is that this is the cool new stuff, which is contradistinguished with the boring old stuff. It's linear, low-level, uninteresting. It's static capabilities versus exciting, dynamic, good. Now the problem, as you will appreciate, is that any time that as academics, when we start taking our aesthetics and we take the stuff that we love and put it as a definitional attribute, we're going to get ourselves in trouble. And while this could be understandable in terms of what consultants do, because at the end of the day they want to take business, they want to create the sense of old stuff boring, new stuff exciting, come hire us to take new stuff, we as an academic community may want to be a little bit more careful about creating or enhancing the bandwagon that exists for sensible reasons. So let me now go to the academic work, or the work that has gotten perhaps the most citations whenever ecosystems are used. Marco City in the Jacobides book, the Keystone Advantage, is canonically used as one of the basic citations in terms of saying ecosystems, Ian City and Levy in 2004. So let's see what Ian City and Levy in 2004 had to tell us about ecosystems. And what they say is drawing the precise boundaries of an ecosystem is an impossible and, in any case, academic exercise. Which which is somewhat sobering because this is the definition that we cite when we say we know what ecosystems are, which probably suggests that we need to do a slightly better job of figuring out what it is, in addition to thinking that it is a nice set of poetry that we'll use to suggest that there is more interesting things that we can do. Now, this shows you that over the last few years, last 2 years are partial, there's been a rapid increase in the use of the term ecosystem. If you go to ISI Web of Science and you consider the papers that have ecosystem in the title or in the abstract or in the keywords, which means that there is a lot of interest and excitement. Now, of course, the challenge here is what is it that we're going to do? Now, we've recently had some papers, including a recent paper by Ron Adler that says, well, let's put some order in the chaos, and I think that people who are interested in ecosystems are a little concerned that the discussion of ecosystems may soon descend into the mess that we have seen in business models, which about 15 or 20 years later, we still have papers thinking about what is the right definition and debating what is the usefulness of the construct. And obviously, when ecosystems become so large that they encompass everything, similar to the issues that we have with platforms, it will mean nothing, because having a concept which is malleable enough and broad enough is not necessarily going to go anywhere in particular. I don't want to undermine, and this is work, by the way, with Hannibal de Ware and Carmelo Cenamo, we don't want to undermine the importance or the potential value of the rhetorical use of the term in order to have a slap in the face, wake up managers and tell them, you need to think about the world beyond your own narrow confines. It can be very useful. And there will be business books that will be useful because they will drive managerial action, they will expand the vantage point and so on and so forth. We are saying that in addition to that, we also want to think about this as an academic construct. And if it is going to be used in research, we need to think about it carefully, not only about the what. Let me decide that an ecosystem is something too big and fuzzy. Well, perhaps it is, but the question is why? And more importantly, when do we expect to see more of it? If we think that ecosystems are more important now, we need to create some theoretical primers that are going to tell me why is it that in 2017 I see more of these things that I call ecosystem that I saw in 2004 or in 1995, because we say they are more important. There must be embedded in our understanding of ecosystem some story that tells us how these things evolve. So, first of all, let me give you my own take in terms of why I think that we see more discussion of ecosystems. I think that we see more discussion of ecosystems to a large extent because we do see a substantial change in the organization of production. And that's perhaps my bias because that's what I have been studying over the last couple of decades. We do see that sectors disintegrate, they unbundle, and as a result of regulatory and technological changes, the latter being well understood, I guess, by the people in this room, we see that we have a much greater variety and a much greater, much narrower set of activities that can actually be put together. Now, when you think about that and when you think about the importance of it, there is a greater ability of having modular architectures, and there is also a greater ability to reconfigure them. You know, people like Andrea have helped us think about system integration and about the growing role of the people putting together a number of distinct actors and the possibility of configuring them in different ways. And I think that the issues of system integration are moving from the more traditional context, like the advanced manufacturing, that have been studied by the COPS tradition, to a much broader set of arrays, going from healthcare to other advanced services that are shifting a little bit what the empirical focus is. On the theoretical side, I think that what you will see, certainly in terms of the strategy literature, is that we spent in the 70s and 80s a lot of time thinking about the aggregates, industry development, industry groups, industry dynamics, and then people started getting very excited about looking back in the firm. You had the growth of the resource-based firm, you had evolutionary economics coming in and driving this excitement about capabilities, and then my co-editor in ICC, David Thies and others, sort of started speaking about dynamic capabilities, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what that means. So people were looking at things that were at the level of the organization. Whereas now, the discussion, I think both about industry architectures and certainly about platforms and ecosystems, is to rethink what the aggregate is, to look at the nature of the industry environment. And finally, I think that what we also see happening is that there is a greater an effort to try to see if there's going to be some theoretical innovation. As I said, well, all of that stuff is understandable, and while we can see why we use ecosystems more, the question is what exactly these guys are, why do they matter, and more importantly, I think that we should focus on when we should expect them to arise. The questions that I have are not questions that drive only from the phenomenological side. They're also questions about the theoretical condition. What is different, what is distinct, what is interesting about ecosystems, and if I'm going to put my economist hat on, I want to look at them from a comparative institutional analysis. If you think that ecosystem is a different way of organizing that is better than either the traditional hierarchy, organizing things within firms, or having traditional spot market exchanges, we need to understand what are the coordination problems and what are the production problems that ecosystems solve that existing ways of organizing things were not capable of. What is this distinct angle? So what this paper does is, well, it's actually changed quite a bit from earlier iterations, which were much more based on a critical review of the literature. But I guess that what the reviewers have pushed, and I think has turned out to be interesting, is to shift from the critical review of the ecosystem literature in business and strategy to a proposed agenda to progress with a theory about business ecosystems. And the interest is to think about the theoretical foundation of ecosystems, on why we care of them, when is the concept analytical useful, not just a good set of words in terms of poetry, and also why firms align in there. And as I said, this is part of a broader agenda of increasing the attention to the aggregate as we think about our analytics. We started looking into different strands of literature and then said, before we propose stuff, let's try and figure out what people have done. So we looked at a couple of different things. We looked at all the people that have papers either published, and in some occasions we used papers that were about to be published, and then we categorize them in different angles. Now we see that there is a number of different angles. Some of this analysis is sort of has been excised by the current version of the paper. I suspect that there's going to be another version of the paper that we will need to create, providing some of the lit review material, perhaps responding to an invitation that we have on that. And what we saw is that there are people that speak about ecosystem focusing on the firm, focusing on innovations, or focusing on platforms. And the focus of analysis in terms of the firm, which is more than half the articles, takes the firm as the focus, and then the ecosystem is everything that there is around it. By the way, there is another use of the word ecosystem, which is a modern day parlance for what we used to call clusters. The cynic in me thinks that once clusters became a little bit modern, partly because we funded a heck of a lot of clusters that went exactly nowhere. And you can think about all the politics of why politicians like clusters, because they can support pork-barrel spending in their own constituencies with high moral stakes. We needed to reinvent part of the regional activities by having the word ecosystem. So even at the regional level, we now speak about ecosystem. These we separate that out because they are quite distinct, and the use of the word ecosystem is really much closer to the older literature that has to do with regional development, economic geography, and the conditions in the, that we see there. So we focus much more aspects, but on the aspects that consider the firms, the innovation, or the platform. Now, the firm angle is one where the focus is the firm and its new value proposition, its community, organizations, institutions, individual that comprising enterprise and the enterprise customers and suppliers. Other people that focus on innovations or new value propositions, not only with a focus on the firm, and Ron Adler, I guess, is vocal in this respect. And finally, there are people that say, well, we care about ecosystems because they sit on platforms. Now, I am saying that because there's a great variety of definitions. As you can see, there are different angles that are taken in each one of them, and each has essentially a slightly different focus on this. By the way, you will see that there is a small number of empirical studies. There's an even smaller number of empirical studies that move beyond qualitative, which is probably the sign of an literature that's trying to make sense of the phenomenon before cracking on with the harder process of trying to figure out what's going on. There's various definitions. And you could say, so what? If we know about what we're talking about, even if we have a huge, big number of different definitions, that still would be okay. And beyond the differences that we have, we also do have a few common attributes, and I'll move into the common attributes in a while. The concern that one has going through the literature is that quite often the theoretical novelty is not articulated. So we see things that could be groups of complementary actors, which we have kind of studied in a post-East tradition, people like Mary Tripsis and others, that are then now called ecosystems. And the question is this really new, or is it the reincarnation of some of the dynamics that we already had considered? By the way, most of the ecosystem literature speaks about the fact that it is co-opetition in the spirit of collaborative game theory. Any guesses of how many of the ecosystem papers make use of collaborative game theory or co-opetition a la Nixon and Nail-Butt? Zero. None. Zilch. And it's really interesting that out of a couple hundred pages that we said, they say, here's the spirit of, and nobody actually bothers to say exactly what that spirit is and how exactly it connects, or, you know, show the bloody thing and use the frameworks. Probably because the frameworks themselves are not necessarily terribly easy to use, and also because when you use it, you would actually see that it doesn't make any difference if you use that framework when you look at industries or when you look at ecosystems. The mechanics of CGT would be exactly the same in terms of distribution of value. So I think that there is a little bit of an open field over here. Another thing that you see when you study the literature on ecosystems is that people get terribly excited at the fact that there is collaboration. And you say, well, the good thing about ecosystems is that people aren't selfish bastards who compete. They also care about collaboration. Now the problem is that if you start putting collaboration, which is an outcome variable, as part of the definition, you risk getting yourself in quite a bit of trouble. It's like saying that I'm going to define football fields as opposed to people playing football in whether football is played well. You can't quite say what is a team, because to have good teams or bad teams, the definition of what the game is cannot be by the quality of the game that is being played or by any attributes that we're going to have in terms of the output that can potentially be said. Now, let's move back into the definition. And Ron Adler has a recent paper where he focuses in saying, well, we can, actually he says strongly that we need to pin it down, partly because if we don't pin it down, we're all going to be confused. So he proposes that the ecosystem is defined by the alignment structure of the set of partners, which is useful, but essentially that defines the what? That defines the topography of the players that get together. It can give you a different, a potentially useful grammar, but it doesn't necessarily tell you why the alignment itself is useful or what drives ecosystems themselves. It also gives you an idea of why it is that managers that look at ecosystems will be able to understand some complexities that they would not be if they were not looking again, does not really focus on why ecosystems are important and when you would have them emerge. What we're trying to do in the paper is to offer at least our own take on that. And we don't say that this is the only way that you can think about ecosystems, but we're saying, well, look, if ecosystems are important, we might as well try to suggest some foundations, what makes it different, and what some theoretical primers that help us understand them. A couple of different things. The first thing that we think, prescriptively, is that ecosystems, in order to be useful analytically, should focus on some structures. They should tell you what the it is, and you can then figure out whether it works well or not. Let me give you a very simple example. If we're going to think about an ecosystem, we must, and I emphasize the must, it's prescriptive, we must be able to find ecosystems that work well and ecosystems that don't work well. And then we can figure out what makes some ecosystems work well and some not. Think about one of the canonical examples that I've heard you guys use, which is you think about apps, and you think about operating systems, and you think about the ecosystems on top of the platforms that these create. We should be able to not only understand the existence of different ecosystems, but also to appreciate that there are some ecosystems, like Symbian, that against all predictions of traditional network effects, they had 63% of the market, went down to zero. There's something in the way that this was managed, I'll argue, the way that this ecosystem was managed, that essentially made them go down to zero and allow Android and Google to move up and push them aside. They both created some ecosystems, they had some differences, perhaps the way that they were structured were meaningful enough to make one go down to dust and the other to become dominant. And these are things that we should be looking at. So the theory of ecosystems should also explain why ecosystems emerge in the first place. Why do we have something like either Symbian or the Android or Apple operating system, rather than having the more traditional structure whereby you could have things that are either more vertically integrated or where customers make fully their own choices without thinking about the platforms on which they get. So what is it that we propose? Because all of that essentially is a long-winded throat clear. We propose a couple of different things. The first thing is that we say that modularity will end up playing an important role. The second thing that we say is that complementarities and the nature of complementarities are behind the things that we see when it comes to ecosystems. What do ecosystems do? Well, let us actually think about what we want to achieve through this definition. The idea in terms of ecosystems is that we are seeing some interesting mix between hierarchy and autonomy. What is new and what is interesting about ecosystems, because we've seen independence before, we have seen supply chains like Toyota, and you can say, oh great, the independent players in the Toyota value chain, it's not like what they do in Ford, which is more sort of transaction by transaction, squeeze the supplier as you want. You have these people who collaborate and compete, and they're all in the same chain, they're all trying to do stuff. There's a couple of interesting things. When it comes to the Toyota supply chain, you have one person calling the cracks, calling the shots and cracking the whip. And that is Toyota that decides what goes in the car versus not. What you see in ecosystems, which I think is what makes them different and exciting, is that there is some combination of perhaps the photo actor, call it Apple, call it Google, in terms of who participates in my ecosystem, or what are the conditions in which you participate in the ecosystem, but it is ultimately the customer that decides the price and quantity that they buy out of the things that are offered within that ecosystem. So you have a different mix between the autonomy and control. It isn't the lack of control that you would have in a pure market transaction where I just do my own stuff and another person does their own stuff. There is something that has to do with the ability of having both greater autonomy but also to resolve some coordination and interoperability problems. We're saying that that happens because we have modular architectures. And we think that modularity is important, and we think that if you look at ecosystems, and if you think about the different participants in ecosystems, they exist in places which are characterized with what Carlos Baldwin would say thin crossing points, i.e. that they can do their own stuff. If you think about the epigear matrices, they are the places that do not have interdependencies across, but only within the little sort of blocks by which I can do my stuff and I connect to the ecosystem without needing a heck of a lot of coordination. Why? Well, because if you needed a heck of a lot of coordination, someone has to decide how these coordination problems are resolved, and if you decide how they are resolved soon enough, you will move to a more hierarchical model where someone is actually going to dictate. So as a result, the modularity which allows this independence is an important driver of ecosystems. That also gives us the first step in thinking about it in a comparative institutional analysis way. You start asking yourself, why is it that we see more ecosystems emerging? Part of the answer is that because we are moving to a greater amount of modularity in the way that the economy is structured. And as you are creating this modularity, you then get the possibility of organizing players in a more independent way. Now, the independent way is only one part of the story. The second half of the story has to do with the interdependence. So let's think a little bit about the interdependence. If things were entirely independent, then you could say, well, we just have different sub-markets and you pick and choose. Well, the issue is that in addition to modularity, which allows for alignment to occur, you also have a need for some coordination. When you think about coordination, I think that you need to go a step back. And you need to think about not coordination and the fact that, oh, people collaborate, but why do they collaborate? What compels them to collaborate? What makes this collaboration important? That takes us down to the notion of complementarities, which is sort of a logically a sort of previous step to the collaboration, which is the result of the complementarities that lead to the links between them. What we're suggesting is that ecosystems constitute a distinct kind of solution of the interfirm coordination problem that arises under circumstances of modularity, but when there are complementarities between actors. And again, going back to these canonical examples, think about what it is that the apps do. Well, the apps need to sit on an operating system. That is, that there is a complementarity, there is a functional link between one and the other. They can't just work in ways that are entirely standard. Now that could start giving you another interesting insight. And the insight is that if things are standard, then we don't really speak of ecosystems. We can think about things that are neatly separated, and I will come to the role of standardization. Actually, we developed that as a result of some previous conversations in a different Lewis building this spring, and think about some of the dynamics over here. Let me take a step back, because we need to think theoretically about what complementarities are. What is the nature of complementarities? Well, economists spend a heck of a lot of time trying to formalize that, not only analytically but also mathematically, and I'll try to borrow some of the ideas that come from that field. There's two types of complementarities. One type of complementarity is what is called a strict or unique complementarity. A does not function without B, and that is what underlies a lot of the production issues. You need a tire for your wheel in order for that to be functional. If you want to think about what, say, either the property rights people speak about or what Williamson speaks about, essentially they say that I really need something co-specialized to what I do in one part of the production process to complement me. Or, to put it more technically, there may be, for particular output quality levels, I want your input co-specialized with another input in order to give something that is more productive. I can go to the generic stuff, but this is less productive. This is what underlies asset specificity, and as such, the need for integration in the traditional Williamsonian analysis. This is also what underlies many of these complementarities in production. Technically, A does not function without B, and the elements are unproductive if they're not used together, or a variety of these elements is unproductive, and then you need to go to your second best, which are less productive. There is a second type of complementarity, and that is what is called supermodular complementarity. This was known in economics as also Edgeworth complementarity, and that is also what underlies network effects. This is different. It basically says that the value of A increases in B. Now, the analytics of it have been developed, and they're quite beautiful, although reasonably complex, to be solved by Tockis in the 70s, and there was a lot of excitement about supermodularity in work that people like Paul Milker and others did in the late 80s and early 90s. And essentially, this is stuff that you see not as much in production as you see it in consumption. Clearly, demand-side effects are driven by exactly that. My value increases in the existence of complements. Whereas in production, the same thing does not happen. Now, why am I saying that? We may already start to realize that in many of the real-world situations, we have the mix between the two. The underlying economics and the drivers of the incentives of the people that are involved in this common group are fundamentally different when you have a unique complementarity, which is the more traditional production networks, whereas when you have a supermodular complementarity, where there is a extra turbo-boosted excitement when the people that complement you are successful. I'll go to that in just a moment. Now, what we are saying is that the role of complementarities are at the root of ecosystems. The final bit in terms of our theory of ecosystems is another distinction which we think is very important, which is whether these complementarities, whether they are supermodular or whether they are strict, is generic or specific. Now let's think about that. You can say that I can think of particular complementarities, and let me give you one strict complementarity, which is the triplet teacup, hot water, tea bag. Obviously, you need all three to combine in order to give you something that has value. By the way, you need it in fixed proportions. You're not going to get more benefit because you have a larger of one, because they are used in fixed proportions. That illustrates strict complementarity. Now, if you think about that, you can say, well, analytically, these are modular, these are complementary. Shouldn't we include that in ecosystem? Shouldn't we start speaking about the tea ecosystem? And you could. Frankly, I think that in a lot of our research, we do. But should we get terribly excited about the fact that these things work together? If you take one of them out, the value goes down. My answer is not really. I mean, if you think about interdependencies, they underlie consumption, and if you think about interdependencies between players, they underlie any system, not only centrally planned, but certainly any economic system. General equilibrium theory was about interdependencies between everything and everyone, saying that, if you have a change in one factor of production, there's other people in a very different market that are going to adapt, is part and parcel of economic life anyway. So I think that we should tone down our excitement, because when you have things that are generic, they don't give me anything that is terribly new or terribly exciting. Where it becomes interesting is when we are specific, i.e., when there are complementarities that work in particular groups of actors. Let us now go back to part of the stuff that you guys have been looking at when it comes to, say, platforms. An app works on an iOS platform, or an app works on an Android platform. Now that is important because it means that the iOS platform and the app have a specific complementarity. They are tied in ways that make them linked to a given group of players. And we'll start understanding what is the difference and the importance of the incentives. Let me give you through a thought experiment, and consider that for a moment I can give you a little magic wand, And this magic wand can take an app that you wrote and is specific only to Android, and can also apply to iOS or any other platform. Now the question is, if you have this magic wand, and you used to be in Android, how vested will you be in terms of the success of Android? You can say, actually, I don't care. Why? Because if I don't use it there, I can use it anywhere. That, to me, is the defining attribute of ecosystems. It's going to the other polar extreme. All of the work that I put in to create an app for an Android will be lost, and as a result, I bloody well care about how well Android is doing. Now we can start understanding what of this magic collaboration. It ain't tree hugging, it ain't new perspectives, it is just that the conditions are very different, and all of a sudden you really care, because what you have done is not going to be able to be available for you if you move somewhere else. So the degree of fungibility, i.e. the extent to which what you do is not specific, is not generalized, but is specific to a group of players, is definitionally what creates this different set of dynamics, which gives you a different canonical problem to the canonical problems that we have explored so far. And this is important because all of a sudden you start understanding how the type of complementarities also matters. So you say, if I have a strict or unique complementarity, then I care about it, because if the stuff that I'm connected to, whether it's based on a platform or in any other way, goes down, then I will not have demand. If you have supermodular complementarity, you have the turbo boosted stuff that not only will I have no demand, but if there is more excitement in this ecosystem, people will want that more, so we'll have a price benefit. So I will be able to benefit more because what I do is more valuable. So I have an extra interest in the ecosystem, not only because it gives me my daily bread, but because it takes my daily bread and turns it into fancy panettones. So I care about this kind of stuff. So what I'm saying is that you have generic stuff where the elements are fungible, you have specific where the elements involve some degree of customization or specialization, and that we speak about thinking about what is the purpose of the system, but more importantly to think about this dial which is called fungibility. So let me go back to what the point here is, which is that ecosystems contain groups of firms that deal with non-generic, unique, and or supermodular complementarity. This is why their fates are intertwined. We don't start with the definition of their fates being intertwined. We try to figure out why their fates are intertwined and in which ways, and how that differs on the basis of some primers, which is fungibility, and the nature of the complementarities, and that this is enabled by modularity. They have, as a result, not as a definitional property, some degree of codependence. But, interestingly, and that's where modularity comes in, these complementarities can be contained and coordinated without the need for vertical integration. But rather what you see is co-specialization at the group level. You can think about co-specialization, we've seen it crop up in other parts again, certainly in transaction cost economics, but the canonical problem, if you want to even sort of write it down, in transaction cost economics, is very different. The incentive issue in the way that the strict complementarities work is very different from the one that exists in terms of ecosystems. So, ecosystems allow for some degree of coordination without requiring hierarchical governance, precisely because of the ability to use some standards or base requirements that allow complementers to make their own decisions in terms of design, prices, etc., while allowing for complex independent product or service to be produced. Now this stuff is quite interesting because it tells you what is the economic nature of these relationships, and actually what underpins part of the social dynamics of this relationship. It also starts telling you, if there are complementarities that are generic, or rather if there are complementarities that are specific, and if whoever is at the center, at the hub of this. Quite often, some of the big platform firms, like the GAFA, take advantage of the fact that they are holding this crucial element of access, especially when supermodular complementarities are involved. It may be in the interest of the other players, and certainly of society, of trying to change this into generic. And that is what the standards issues are. Because in essence, creating standards like the ones that we have created in 3G and 4G, not the ones that we have in 5G, is what allows for ecosystems, in essence, to be dissolved. Now think about that, again, as a thought experiment. And think about a world whereby we are forcing some of these ecosystems to essentially unbundle and stop being ecosystems with strong firms in the middle, and where you have modularity, but you have generic as opposed to specific complementarities, and about the differences that that would make in terms of the outcomes. I can also bet you that a world like that would not have Facebook, Google, Amazon as the 3 of the 5 most profitable firms in the world today. But I'm moving ahead of myself. What you can start also looking at here is to think about ecosystems on the basis of areas that have some modularity and then which have either unique or supermodular complementarities or both. And what I'm suggesting is that when they are generic, you have no group level co-specialization. You do have potential complementarities like, tennis balls and tennis rackets and tennis courts, things that are very important because they are complements and they will affect the extent to which you're going to have demand. But again, this is something which is, as old as the spades and shovel strategy for the people that were digging for gold in the West, and how you position yourself when you need some complements. Coincidentally, in the gold rush in the United States West, there's a wonderful sort of couple of historical papers documenting the fact that the poor gold diggers made no money. Those selling food, spades and shovels made quite a bit of money. But again, these are not ecosystems. They are very codependent. They need each other. They divide the common value add, but not in an ecosystem form. So, our definitional proposition here is that ecosystems is a business ecosystem is a set of actors with varying degrees of group-level non-generic complementarities without full hierarchical control. So I spoke about both of these things and about the role of fungibility and also the lack of hierarchical control, which I think is an important defining attribute. What can we do once we do that? Well, it's cool because in terms of ecosystem coordination, we say that modularity is a predictor of ecosystem emergence and also a design variable. Sometimes it leads to the accidental creation of ecosystems. It's useful remembering that Steve Jobs started by suing the heck of anyone who wanted to do what he's doing, and then says, oh blimey, it's modular, people can come in. Rather than me suing them, I might as well create some standards with which I can cooperate with them. Sometimes, and there's a recent paper we have John Paul McDuffie and my PhD student, Jennifer Tay, the idea of creating these may be wrong-headed, and we're looking at the car of automobiles there, and modularity does not mean openness, right? Open standards can mean generic complementarities, which will essentially mean that we're shifting from ecosystems to what I would call a non-ecosystem industry architecture. The governance and the rules and ecosystem reflect and drive coordination. I think that this is very important because we can then start studying separately what are these rules of the ecosystems and how do you see coordination emerging. When you think about ecosystem collaboration, you can think about the nature of complementarities, and as I said, supermodular binds firms together more because it makes participation more valuable as benefit accrue giving more value. Fungibility becomes a very exciting variable. The extent to which you need to be specific or not is a huge question in these designs of these ecosystems. And if you think about it, it raises interesting questions for either the person designing the ecosystem or those trying to figure out which ecosystem I'm going to join. A very fungible an ecosystem that requires things that are very specific is an ecosystem where the person at the center is very strong, which means that I'm not going to go there because I may be held up. I don't like that. But on the other hand, once you're in, once you have enough actors to join you, then you may be able to do whatever the heck you want, which then starts taking us into the competition between different ecosystems, and if you have an ecosystem which is dominant, it can afford to be much more brutal to its members than an ecosystem that is not dominant. Take a look at the different services and how Uber pays its drivers less than pretty much all of the others in order to recruit them and make them go inside its own boundaries. And by the way, to the extent that Ubers and the others become standardized, then you will see that their ability to extract value will go down, and we'll see that the market capitalization, which implies that there is a lot of non-fungible stuff, is going to go up in flames, which is sort of an interesting potential implication. In terms of value capture, then, I think that what is important to note is that the fungibility and the nature of complementarities are not symmetrical. Directionality also matters, and we speak about in the paper about how to manage and map and think about what are these interdependencies and how do they connect about them, what are the tactics of building ecosystems and how they differ if they are supermodular than if they are not, and how the governance rules and ecosystems need to be understood in their competitive context. You can think about Symbion's demise as a result of its own governance and the strong-headedness of Nokia, and you can think About Android and the fact that Google said, "Oh, come, good friends, and we'll create this nice thing together," and then started tightening the screws. And you can think about the relative evolution of these rules in one ecosystem that needs to be understood in the context of what the other ecosystem and of the players that are looking at the potential of complementing either or both. So again, we start having a little bit more traction over here. And I think that this is important because as we are moving on, as I said earlier on, this system integration element to ecosystems is going to be very important. As new products and services emerge, you see that a number of the things that we get excited about cut across a number of different sectors. Two implications of that. Implication number one, these are different products, which means that the modular boundaries are more clearly defined, and what you are doing is that you're putting them together in new and interesting ways. Implication number two, it is statistically unlikely that the same firm that is dominant in one will be dominant in another, which means that we now are thinking about new ways that we are recombining the world, which means that ecosystems, I expect, will be an important way of organizing economic activities. What is important is that this has the potential of changing the way that we connect with players. I think that take a look at Babylon Health. It's a very interesting app that tries to change the way that healthcare is provided, that the National Health Service in the UK is now condoning and using, and they are creating ways in which they can interact with physicians, and originally they are trying to create a closed book of physicians. What should we think about in terms of the policy implications? Should we accept that, or should we say, well, hang on a minute, when we see these ecosystems, we also must think about whether we want to essentially break them up, because while the coordination problems can be sorted that way, they might also be able to be sorted by standards. And this group thinking about infrastructure has certainly a lot to say about the evolution of standards, closed standards, open standards, and the reasons that we want standards when it comes to important infrastructure sectors. So, what is the resulting agenda? I think that rather than spending our time thinking about the definition of ecosystems, and there can be a number of them, we can spend our time more productively thinking about the structure and evolution of ecosystems. I think that there is an empirical project that looks at the emergence, demise, and mutation of ecosystems. So to think about what is it that not only leads to ecosystems, we say that there is an ecosystem, but when did we see the formation of the ecosystem? And when did ecosystems collapse? Because they do. And I think that from their demise and the drivers of the demise, which is probably going to involve comparative analysis, we have quite a bit to learn. When is it that firms have decided to open up and create an ecosystem, said, sod it, forget it, I'm going to now have a closed supply chain because I don't trust that anymore. They do that in some regards. I think that we need to document the governance and the rules in ecosystems. Important questions like what defines when someone is in or when someone is not? To what extent does the center of the ecosystem is able to prescribe what is the price range that you have, what is the quality that you get, the vetting process, different in iOS than it is in Android, is important. Participation rules and exclusivity is also very important in the way that the ecosystems try to use that as an additional tool to create interest for themselves. Understanding the fungibility of investments and its impact, I think, is important. Documenting it and seeing how that enters into the dynamics of ecosystems could be quite exciting. And also, we need to think about the role of ecosystems in society and welfare. As I said, I'm getting a little concerned with the growth that you get in the big farm. And I'm getting a little concerned that society is creating some monsters that essentially are getting a little too strong in terms of their own activities. By the way, they're not technology monsters anymore. They are using technology to essentially suck up part of the value that comes in a big number of different areas. If you want to think about one example, think about Ant Financial, which is the financial services arms of Alibaba, that essentially is taking all of the activities that is being done in terms of its own financing, and I'll show you what its strategy is for it in a moment, and whose valuation is 60 billion as a result of having about 350 million customers, because everyone interacts with Alibaba. I can certainly understand the benefit of having this as an ecosystem, but do we really want to have these kinds of firms? What else do we need to do? We need to take both more seriously and with a grain of salt the role of the hub or keystone. When should a firm try to create its own ecosystem and become a hub? Much of the advice that I see say, create your own ecosystem. My view on that is rubbish. Most firms do not want to create their own ecosystem. They want to strategically think about how they manage different ecosystems. They may want, if they are big telco companies, to make sure that Amazon does not dominate cloud, because you're going to create a set of codependent cloud layers that's going to turn you into a pipe. They want to create a couple of strong other rivals, not necessarily be an ecosystem themselves, or even worse, deluding themselves into thinking that they are the center of an ecosystem. We also want to think about hubs that tried and failed and changed their role. It's an empirical question. Is it a simple life cycle story? How does that work? And also take the small guys. You know, you have two things. Our ability of influencing the decisions in Google and Facebook, frankly, are more limited than we would like them to be. Our ability to add value to the millions of people that complement them and have a real challenge of figuring out what the heck do I do with it, rather than telling them, see, they make money, be like them, is going to be much more useful. So thinking about the role of the small guys that complement the big ecosystem and what their relative strategies are could be more interesting. And then consider the process and organizational challenges that you have when firms are managing ecosystems or participating in ecosystems. How do these things differ when you have new sectors, when you have existing sectors? As I said, in addition to thinking about ecosystems, and that comes from the strategy presentation that Ant Financial did about a year ago, consider shifting from thinking about the ecosystem as the firm in the middle and all the activities around it, which is important, and I mentioned before, we need to care about that as well. I think we also need to think about ecosystems as the things that drive different patterns of value creation. And to simply illustrate, consider the relative plight of two firms. One firm, which is the Groupe Accor, that is one of the biggest hotel companies in the world with 500,000 people working for it, that makes 5.4 billion euros of profit, and Booking.com, with 8,000 employees, making 5.8 billion euros of profit. Why? Because they have created an ecosystem with codependent players, and it will be interesting for us to think about how and why this happens. What I told you before is one of the things that explains that, and that connects to some other research that I don't quite have the time to tell you, and how structure of the ecosystems in the computer versus automobile sector differs and what that means for application. Let me wrap up with this slide, and this shows the 5 biggest companies by market capitalization in the world and the different ventures they have. It shows 2 things. The first thing that it shows is that there are different types of ecosystems, and that these types of ecosystems are not at the firm level, but at essentially the product or need level, i.e. that you have Facebook with a number of ecosystems in a number of its products, and you also have Facebook thinking about how its presence in all these different ecosystems connect. The second thing that they should do is scare the heck out of you. They are the 5 most valuable firms in the world, and they want to do what Dick Taylor, who got this year's Nobel Prize in Economics, understands people do, which is choose the default and be lazy. And they want to also make sure that they are the choice architects for you, being at the hub of an ecosystem that serves all of your needs. Understanding what lies behind it is important. The paper speaks about the connection between other academic pieces of work, alliance literature, network research, co-specialization, and so on and so forth. But mostly, it finishes with a graph that says, what are the different things that are important, what can we study? And I think the answer is a heck of a lot beyond the terminological, and I think that trying to move to a theory of ecosystems, as opposed to a poetry of ecosystems as a metaphor, is both useful and something that a number of people in this room could certainly contribute. For that, thank you very much.
Kind of compelling presentation that the several issues in and around ecosystems. We think we have a few minutes for questions or comments, observations. Anybody? Yeah.
So I enjoyed the presentation. I enjoyed what you were going through, but I was struck a couple of times with the idea of the center of an ecosystem and the idea of an inside and outside. And I was drawn by thinking about, for instance, the Darwinian idea of ecosystems, looking at a biological model of ecosystems in which an inside and an outside might be problematic. And I'm thinking about, there are complementers, the finches of Darwin's finches with their specialized beaks for particular types of products. You can start to map out an ecosystem in that sense. And I just wondered, what is the center of an ecosystem? And I know we can see very strong central points within Apple and various other places, but for instance, the Apple ecosystem is still reliant on licensing from Microsoft, and Samsung can make an awful lot of money out of an iPhone. There's arguments that they make more, that you could actually unfold that to the internet and the reliance on the network providers. It's just the boundary drawing.
Sure, so a couple of things. First of all, let me start with the biological analogy, which I think... So the first thing is, what is ecosystem in biology? The answer is nothing. It is not a term that means anything to a biologist. Speaking of Dick Levin, one of the Levin and Kaufman fame, and one of the great, I guess, evolutionary biologists, and he looked rather bemused. He said, oh, we don't really mean anything by ecosystem. It's sort of a broad set of everything that is together, but it is not a term. There is no relationship, and there is no formal definition. It is poetry in, essentially, the words of the biologist. He says what you're meaning is either mutualism or symbiosis, which is exactly the examples that you give. It's an example of mutualism, and there is an understanding of the mutualism and the evolution of mutualistic relationships. Shells with little prawns, blind prawns that live within them, specialized beaks and that, starting from Darwin, and then moving all the way down. I think that biological metaphors are probably going to end up
misleading as they're not. First of all, because we don't have any interesting analogy that can help us scaffold our thought. That's what analogies do. They give you interesting things when you are a little bit lost, and then they put you on the way. I think that what I see is a set of relationships which is economically important, which has to do with non-fungible group-level co-specialization. In terms of that, we go back to your second half of the question, which is, do we really have a center or not? Should we even be speaking of center? And I get the center, or, well, in the boundaries, it is anyone that does a non-fungible investment into something. So as far as I'm concerned, if there is something that ties you to it, as opposed to, well, you know, I'm an electricity provider. I will sell my electricity to the people that have computers, that do stuff for people that are in one ecosystem or the other. I don't care. And also, similarly, I buy electricity. I can buy it, price might go up, may go down. There could be different providers. Do they matter? Perhaps they do, but they're not really part of my ecosystem because there is nothing that is specific. This is my own proposal of defining the participation on something that is specific. You had the third question, but let me return back to that's the third question. Your second question, which is the question of, is it someone of the core, right? That was the boundaries, which is part 3. Part 2 of your question is, let's think now about the core. Okay, well, if you think about the core, I would say that this depends on the governance of ecosystems. There could be ecosystems, and there are some ecosystems that are not driven by a strong core. They could be driven by ad hoc processes, or if you think about Linux as an ecosystem, by a group of programmers, but do not care about the dominance in the world, but they want to create something, blah, 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 blah. So we can look at ecosystems that are driven by firms, or voracious firms. You can look at ecosystems that are governed in a different way, and you can compare their relative merits, where you see more of them or you see less of them, in the same way that in the past we looked at pure profit-making firms and cooperative organizations in different areas. I think that the understanding of the way that the ecosystem itself, either in terms of the sponsor or of the governance of the ecosystem, is an interesting area for study. So I will say that great, we need research, empirical research, that says if you have an ecosystem that is heavily managed by one central actor, it may sound dreadful, but it's successful. Or it's actually ends up falling on its head because the central actor can be too voracious. Or if you're Nokia and you're too greedy, it falls down. If you're Amazon and you're like, I'll develop it, I'll squeeze them, but I'll just give enough leeway so that it you know, people are okay with it, it grows. Or that there are other structural benefits of having something that you don't have a common actor. I don't think it is not part of my definition. What I'm saying is that it is statistically less likely to have a group of arrangements without having someone that sets the rules of the game. We can have a group that sets it, but it so happens that more often than not, you see one central player doing it. Not necessarily something that happens. And our research can mitigate that. If we tell people, you can move together, here's a way in which you can put together an ecosystem, make sure that you take the benefits without needing to have one greedy firm in the middle that decides how to put it together, that would be a huge benefit that we would bring by allowing better, essentially collaborative structures that would potentially, you know, be a substitute for people who do it in a hierarchical way. Again, open in terms of future research.
Since we are a bit short of time and the next sessions are faster approach, I suggest if you have any other questions or comments, Michael will be with us until lunchtime.
Until the next session, so I'd be delighted to have. I'll sit in the next section, but unfortunately there's a plane in the afternoon, so we can speak during this coffee break and possibly the next coffee break as well. My email is also easily obtainable on jacobides@london.edu. I think the paper is available on the website, and I'd be delighted to engage in more discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks again.